Well, good afternoon. Placer County Supervisor Kirk Euler back with you on a day where Governor Newsom has decided it's not worth having a conversation about actual data. We're just going to issue edicts and data be damned. You'll recall a couple days ago we had a conversation about comparing the data from 5 counties that have a must mask requirement with 5 counties who have a no mask requirement. And what we saw was that statistically the data was identical. No difference, no discernible difference between must mask and no mask. And yet today, in spite of that, the governor, based on a false premise, and again, we're going to talk data, and I can prove the false premise, based on the false premise that we are seeing a spike in coronavirus cases in California due to the acceleration into phase 3, as opposed to, I don't know, other circumstances, other things that are going on. His assertion is spike is caused by the acceleration of phase 3, and because of that, everybody now has to wear a mask. We're not going to have an actual policy conversation. We're not going to look at actual data. We're just going to, by edict, say everybody has to wear a mask. Now, why do I say the data proves this has nothing to do with phase 3? This has to do with other circumstances. Well, let's start with the fact that most counties in California were not allowed to move into phase 3 until after the first week in June. It wasn't until the last week in May the governor announced that within the first week of June he was going to issue the guidelines for those counties to be able to move into phase 3. So it wasn't until the first week in June that those guidelines were issued and most counties were able to move forward. Placer County, however, back on May 12th, Placer County got our permission to move into phase 3. We saw retail services restart. We saw in-person dining in restaurants restart. So that was on May 12th. May 13th, it started to ramp up. By that weekend, May 16th, things were moving ahead. I had already eaten in restaurants twice. Things were moving ahead full bore. So that was the middle of May. We know that the onset of coronavirus typically is a 5 to 6 day lag from infection to symptoms. How do we know this? Well, this simple little thing right here, the Google tells us that on average it takes 5 to 6 days when someone's infected with the virus for symptoms to show. So, what was our experience in Placer County with our symptomatic results and our test positivity? Well, going all the way back to February, yes, way up there, you can see that on March 1st, 100% positive. One test, one positive, yikes. And over time, as tests increase, looking at the column on the right, you're seeing the percentages decrease. And so with the increase of testing prevalence was the decrease in the percent of positivity, all the way down to here, May 12th, the day that we reopened in Placer County under phase 3, in-person shopping, in-person dining, all that good stuff. We're sitting at 2.4%. So if we have increased activity resulting in increased infections like the governor is asserting, well then certainly by the 20th, we would see that trend change. Oh wait, the numbers continue to go down. And there we are the 20th, and we're dropping down to 2%. And now we're continuing to drop all the way down to May 29th. On May 29th, we hit our lowest number, 1.7%. We were dropping for 13 days after we reopened. Our positivity was dropping. What happened on May 25th? On May 25th, George Floyd was murdered. What happened on May 26th and the subsequent days thereafter? People started taking to the streets. People started protesting, not wearing masks, not socially distancing, shouting, screaming, yelling, spreading whatever they might be carrying, spreading that around. So that 4 days after that began, what happened in Placer County with our results? We started to see our percentages turn around and our positivity started increasing. We went from a low of 1.7 4 days after the murder of George Floyd to where we sit today at 2.5% positivity. So, put another way, in the 19 days from May 13th, in the 19 days from then to May 31st, we saw a grand total of 45 new cases. Now, I've got this circled because this is obviously abnormal. You're seeing a bunch of zeros, ones, you see an 8. That 15, 9 of those 15 were one family, a family that recently arrived here from Africa in Placer County, showed symptoms. All 9 of them were confirmed with the coronavirus. So if you take that out, obviously the number goes down, but even with that number, we sit at about 2 new cases per day. From May 31st to today, the 19 days from May 31st, knowing George Floyd murdered on the 25th, 6 days of symptoms, and what happens beginning June 1st. Look at the numbers start to ratchet up and up and up to where we went from an average of 2 cases a day through May to the first 19 days since May 31st, 13 cases a day. Put another way, here's the bar graph. Placer County allowed to reopen. That represents 2 new cases right there, by the way, those little bars. That's 2 new cases a day. That's 0, that's 1, that's 0, that's 1, that's 0. This is the 8, and we're cruising right along, flat line, right? That 1-8 out of the outlier. We get to the death of George Floyd. We get to the protests beginning in our area, still flat for the next 3 or 4 days, with the exception, again, here's that one spike for the family, 9 people in the family, otherwise that line is down to about here. And then what happens 6 days after the death of George Floyd? Actually, it's a little bit closer to 8 days. Beginning June 3rd, look at what happens. Just takes off like a rocket ship. After the protests, after all this goes down, that's when we see the spike. So you see, the governor doesn't want to have a conversation based on the data, because here we have objective data that shows it has nothing to do with those of us, law-abiding citizens, who just want to get back to living our normal lives. It has everything to do with what we saw occur in the streets of Los Angeles, Sacramento, Roseville, Lincoln, Auburn. Those groups, passionate, close together, chanting, largely non-mask wearing, that's what resulted in this spike. And yet this governor, for whatever reason, decides he's going to take it out on us. You know, Governor, it's really a bad law that makes criminals out of honest citizens, especially when you're so willing to excuse the criminal behavior of so many others.